What's going on, Imperials? Logan is out in theaters. That's right, the last Wolverine movie is upon us. We'll be talking about details of the movie, and in case that somehow wasn't obvious enough, there will of course be spoilers mentioned for the movie, so turn away now if you haven't seen it. Hugh Jackman dons the claws for his final outing as Wolverine. One of my biggest gripes about the movie is that they didn't add two simple words to the title. How hard would it have been to call it Old Man Logan? Logan could be anything from a spy thriller to an Owen Wilson comedy. Anyway, the movie is good, but it is drastically different from the other two Wolverine movies. As would be expected, since they each cover a different, but integral part of his life. It did seem as though the beginning was somewhat similar to the Wolverine, where he was a loner and hiding off on his own. Except this time, instead of living in the woods, he's a limo driver. You find out later that he needs the money because he's hiding a secret out in the desert. And that secret is Charles Xavier. Charles is out there for protection, and at first you believe it's his, that someone may be hunting him. But then you learn that the protection is for others. Charles has developed a degenerative brain disease and must keep getting medication to suppress violent psychic seizures that can be damaging to all that are around him. There are few references to the X-Men at large, but Charles is the embodiment of all of Logan's emotions regarding the X-Men, as well as being the closest thing he's ever had to a father figure. The biggest reference to the X-Men are the actual comic books that they have in the universe of the movie. I love seeing the X-Men finally get the recognition they deserve in their world. Caliban is an interesting choice for this movie. He did have a small appearance in Apocalypse, but here he seems far more grounded and relatable. It was a good enough use for the character and for the plot. After all, I don't really know of anyone who would say that he's their favorite. Then we have the Scene Stealer, X-23. She's younger here than traditionally portrayed, but it does well for the story that they're telling. X-23 may be one of the more successful characters created for an outside medium and then adapted into the comic books, with her first appearance being for the show X-Men Evolution. This young actress does such a good job portraying silent strength, while at the same time giving off a sense of vulnerability. You can see the familial bonds between the characters. And the stunts she did were intricately impressive displays of savagery. That's another thing. I'll be the first one to admit that I can be a little squeamish when it comes to overly excessive violence. There were even parts of the Daredevil series that left me uneasy, but even with the R rating, Logan doesn't really have too many instances of gratuitous gore. It seems more that there's simply moments of shock as you see the claws actually stab instead of some generic slashing. There are a number of riveting action sequences throughout the film that is also interspersed with heart. Even though I'm fairly easy to get misty, there are a number of touching parts to this movie, and the very last shot especially got me. That's one that I won't spoil for you. The villains of this movie were fairly lackluster. First you've got Mr. Robot Hand, who I would have been positive was Tom Felton if I hadn't been watching him on The Flash all this season. He and his army of goons service the plot, I suppose, but they never seem to be all that menacing. Then there's the forgettable Doctor that seems to have confusing family relations to the Weapon X project. By far the most effective villain introduced is the newest model of clone, X-24 if you will. It's a younger clone of Wolverine, in his prime, and it certainly gives Logan a run for his money. Just when all this is building up to something big, it ends rather abruptly, just missing out on a full payoff that we could have gotten from this part of the story. I will say that the pacing for this movie is significantly different from anything else you'd find in a superhero story, and for good reason. Logan is the last Wolverine movie, and that lets it be its own story. It doesn't have to worry about setting anything up for next time, because this is it. That is one drawback of formulating stories as continuing chapters of one giant never-ending story. But Logan gets to have all the freedoms that come with finality, and I respect them for doing that. A big part of this movie is Logan's ailing body, and him not being able to heal like before. As it turns out, the adamantium in his body is poisoning him, so if he never had it put in, would he live forever? I know they did the Death of Wolverine story in the comics, but I don't know if this was a similar explanation for it or not. Since Laura had it put in at a much younger age, will she die much sooner than Logan? If so, get it out of her! One thing I do know with 100% certainty is that this story does not take place in either future presented to us in Days of Future Past. Firstly, the dystopian future had Sentinels running amok, rounding up humans and mutants alike. Even if they eradicated all the mutants, they wouldn't have just kindly let the humans rebuild, and they certainly wouldn't have stopped the hunt before Logan and Charles were dead. Secondly, the revised future has the school intact and full of students. Logan clearly states that in the year 2029, no new mutants have been born for 25 years, and Days of Future Past is in 2023, with mutant children who have clearly been born within the last 25 years. So, while I prefer the happy ending future, I do appreciate the look at this adaptation of an iconic story. After all, the X-Men are no strangers to alternate timelines or realities. We've already seen 3 different timelines within the live-action realm of the X-Men, or maybe 4 or 5 depending on how the TV shows end up determining their continuity. But wait, this confuses me. The post-credit scene for Apocalypse shows the Essex Corporation, this of course being a reference to Mr. Sinister. They take Wolverine's DNA, so I just assumed that meant that they would be the ones behind X-23. But I guess that just means he's going to be the villain for the next X-Men movie that's supposed to be set in the 90s. That's my home turf, so I'll be very interested to see what they do with it. What did you think of Logan? Did it live up to your expectations? Let me know down in the comments. Also, be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And we'll see you around next time.